going to be picking up where we left off after the last video where we're going over some of the assignment details and looking at some of the examples and things for the digital essay, and talked about some of the things that we're going to be working on. Those things, by the way, are also on your assignment sheet, because you do have, just like with the annotated bibliography, a grading rubric that lists like the skills we're going to be working on. So what I'll be looking for to see if you've worked on in your essay. I also said right now we're just kind of working in your notebook and on a Google Doc. We will kind of transition things onto a Wix, but you know, one step at a time. So for this one, we're going to kind of set the stage a little bit for kind of what academic argument is and what we're going to be working on, and then do a little bit of brainstorming to get you ready for the second part of the week, and also some of the things we're going to be working on next week. So we're going to start with academic argument intro. So a couple of things that I want you to kind of write down and remember, because it does sort of set up like what the expectation are, not for the digital component of the digital essay, but the academic component of the essay. So first thing you want to remember is it's for scholars by scholars. So any sort of writing that you do, like once you're kind of in college, no matter what level you're at, you're within an academic community. And so the assumption is that once you're part of this community in this group, there's sort of an assumption that you either are, that you're fluid with and have respect for the values and conventions of the academic genres that exist and that you will be working with. And for the academic context that you'll be working in, or that you're at least practicing it. So I know at this point it's more that you're practicing it, but you're working toward mastery. So opinions are situated in conversation. So again, they're situated in, we did that round table, and you've been kind of working on your own like visual of the conversation that you've been researching. So your opinion is situated in that conversation, in your understanding of what's happening in the conversation, in the texts and perspectives that exist, not in a vacuum, not like, this is what I think because this is what I think, and this happened to me once. It's not. So it's situated in the whole picture, and in your understanding of the issue. And your whatever opinions and claims and analysis that you offer, so basically any author commentary, is logical and grounded in evidence, and we'll talk more about that in this unit. That your compositions make a contribution. You might occasionally be asked to write something that's more report-like, especially for a test where you're just sort of maybe sometimes reporting on what you learned. But even genres like lab reports, I've heard, I don't use lab reports, but I have heard faculty that do talk about how like it's really difficult to get students sometimes to understand how to argue in a lab report. And those are very objective. It doesn't seem like you would be arguing, but anytime you're drawing analysis, so like those like scholarly articles, they're not biased. They're very credible and very fair, but they also have a discussion and a results section. And what are they doing? They're interpreting and commenting on the data. It's an argument. Might not be a popular argument the way that we think about it, but it is a type of argument. It's persuasive because it offers analysis and interpretation of data, of evidence. So you want to make sure that you're saying something to push the conversation forward, not just reporting and almost like patchworking. Sometimes if you're reporting, sometimes it kind of looks a little bit like patchworking, like you're just copying and pasting or getting from all these places and just saying, here's what all of these people said, done, without adding something from you. So you don't want to simply report on what's been said. Academic arguments are fair. We're going to talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but it's possible to write an argument that is logical, engaging, and not grounded in bias. Bias comes from not from having opinions, but not offering opinions, but from offering opinions, that are overly emotional, that aren't based on your knowledge, the conversation, that aren't paired with credible evidence, that aren't considerate of other perspectives. So a lot of times when we think of bias, bias is something that is invested in this being the answer, so they won't consider other things. They might leave out information, so it leaves out, it will omit it, which is leaving out, sorry. It will sometimes manipulate or tweak, like anything that kind of pulls the reader toward this direction using something other than evidence. So it's one of the reasons, we stay away from those articles that it's just the writer talking and there's nothing included, because that's completely biased. They have nothing. So just to keep in mind that we're working on having a fair argument, an argument that is to be heard, not to win no matter what. We're talking about academic writing and persuasion. I want to kind of differentiate between a popular argument and an academic argument. So popular arguments, we can see them in lots of places. Most arguments are popular arguments, not academic arguments. So commercials, social media threads, you know what I'm talking about, especially lately. All of the political arguments and back and forth that typically are based on all different kinds of evidence, depending on whether people are checking what they're reading or not. Personal arguments that you have with people, a lot of online articles and stuff, blogs often, because they're from just that person's perspective, their life. They're not based on evidence or anything. News, a good bit of news, and politics, pretty much all politics. Are popular arguments that can be a little bit biased, because the goal is to argue to win. Whereas if an academic argument, the goal is, again, to be heard and understood, to contribute something, to say, well, here's how I see it. Not necessarily to manipulate or twist or get the other person to agree with you, but if they can understand where you're coming from, that's a step forward. That's adding something to the conversation. This will kind of get into a little bit more because we're going to do appeals, but kind of thinking about the fact that popular arguments often do not really focus on logic, and a lot of times over rely on emotion, whereas with logical arguments, part of creating that academic argument is that you have a well-rounded use of the three appeals. You're building credibility, you are making logical claims, you're using evidence, and you're using emotion for appropriate purposes and not in unfair ways. Oh, sorry, it's doing that thing again. So one of the main things, I guess, to take away with this is that a lot of these popular arguments can be unfair and manipulative, especially regarding other perspectives, and sometimes omit information. They sometimes omit or unfairly represent other perspectives, and omit information that makes them look wrong or dismiss it altogether. Don't give it fair consideration. Whereas in this context, we're going to be striving for credibility and fair-mindedness, so representing opposing views and representing them fairly, and striving to address, understand, and refute opposing information and perspective. So getting at everything and not leaving something out because it's inconvenient to what we have to say. We're also going to be kind of figuring out how and when it's appropriate to use subjectivity and objectivity and be, or what things we consider to be subjective versus objective. We tend to say subjectivity, we tend to associate it with bias, and I guess it can be because it's more about your personal opinions and beliefs and values and things like that. And objectivity is supposedly based completely on data, but sometimes it's really they kind of bleed into each other a little bit. And I'm not saying that I'm encouraging being completely subjective, but there are times when talking about personal things, when using personal experience, and having that emotion and that discussion of how you see the world. There are times when that's appropriate, and to balance that with your objective analysis of data. So they both can work, and kind of like emotion, we tend to demonize the personal stuff, but in some genres, like in the essay we're about to write, it can be appropriate and it can be encouraged. Again, it's according to the genre that you're working in, the field that you're working in. But if you, I mean, if you have an issue that is strictly scientific, you might not have a lot of the subjective material. However, if you have something that's more based on a popular or political or social justice issue, you may have some of those things and be trying to balance those experiences also with your data and your research that you're finding. So the trick is, again, to be able to balance and like know when it's appropriate. So a couple of things, tips for kind of doing this. Avoid overly emotional language. A lot of it is in the trick of the wording. It's not just sharing experience, it's sharing experience in ways that basically like just drip with bias. When you're talking about these other people, but it's with insults or extreme language. And I don't mean like cuss words. I mean like you're clearly angry, like the readers can feel your emotion. So avoiding overly emotional language, avoiding absolute statements like this group always does this, or this is how it always happens, or this will definitely, like if we make this decision, this will definitely happen. Because most things exist in a gray area. So again, it makes you as the writer appear less fair-minded when you're speaking in absolutes and when you're speaking overly emotionally. So it's about kind of keeping control of yourself also, especially if you're emotionally invested in something. Addressing other perspectives and describing them fairly. We'll talk about that. Basically kind of thinking about like when you're describing a different perspective, not using that opportunity to make them sound stupid or make them sound wrong, but so that they would read it and kind of their response would be, okay, yeah, that's how I feel. And giving them credit if they have good ideas or similar concerns, or if you anything that you share, like being willing to like address that. Consider where the other side, again, getting into that now, where other side makes good points. So noting where like there's ideas or concerns or questions or evidence that's valid or understandable, and addressing address problem areas that can even exist within your own perspective. If you can't have your perspective and the way you see it, and in order for that to work, you have to leave out things, or you have to not be able to address it. Address like problems that you see even with your own perspective. That's kind of keeping everything like very black and white. And again, that makes you seem biased. And it also discredits your argument.